By the way, that's a major theme we are seeing is partnerships. Partnerships through the public-private area, not just Manufacturing USA institutes, but seeing partnerships by tech companies. So these accelerators, these incubators, these folks know people, and they're starting to see that in our hard tech world, if you will, in the manufacturing space, that's the biggest problem is who do I need to know that I don't? And because I'm just one piece of a much, much larger pie.
Welcome to the Startup Defense. I have a fantastic guest, an expert in manufacturing. I have Tim Shinbara. Tim, before I jump in and waste everyone's time trying to explain what you've got going on, can you tell our audience who you are, what you do, and what you're passionate about?
Callye, it's great to see you, buddy. It's been a hot minute, man. So thanks for having me on. So in the world of Association for Manufacturing Technology, AMT, I'm their Chief Technology Officer. All that really means is I get a chance to follow the trends in the technology space. That means I spend a lot of time conferences, university labs, institutes, both nationally and internationally. At AMT, we manage the MT Connect Institute. So I'm a board officer, and we continue to push the advancement of that standard for the information model and semantic dictionary for all the data coming off of that manufacturing technology that I referred to earlier. And probably the last little bit of my Venn diagram is do quite a bit here in Loudoun County with the Economic Development Advisory Commission. So working on small businesses, particularly minority and women-owned businesses. We've got an ad hoc we just concluded and trying to get more businesses participating in the county, but also the nation. So a lot of the startup, small biz, and me being one of those guys on the sidebar too, just trying to get businesses engaged, particularly in the manufacturing space, but also just great ideas in people's heads, getting them out in the market.
This is a pro tip for anybody that's listening that wants to get their idea out there. There are people at your county and at your state level and your regional level that are incredibly helpful. And I have a fantastic relationship with both the state level and particularly Fairfax and Loudoun County. They've helped 100 of my clients do believable things. And the way that they reach out to professional networks for people like Tim or myself to provide free mentorship or guidance for the entire ecosystem is unbelievable. If you want to tap into that and figure out what's going on, there's always an association like AMT at a corporate level that you can get involved in that pushes leadership through a market. But there's also somebody in economic development whose sole job is to grow your business that you can just call. And that's great because Tim, I always think of this as what AMT does and what I do to promote manufacturing. We're coming from two opposite but important ends. Is that AMT works with all of the top manufacturers, and you see that come together in systems like MT Connect, which we'll get into. I'm fascinated with that because I'm interested in secure supply chain and digital twin and all the sensors and all the fun things that enables you to do. But AMT is working with all of the manufacturers to make sure that technology is there. And as an organization, you put on one of the largest trade shows in the Western Hemisphere, IMTS. I work with innovators, entrepreneurs, and people that are trying to make the next gen product. In a lot of my case, it's fancy computers, radios, things like that for the defense for the C5 ISR space. But sometimes it's clean tech or what have you. But I'm always trying to promote people, go to your local manufacturer, go figure out how things get made. It's going to make your creativity explode. I really appreciate what AMT is able to do and put so much information out from the big corporate space in front of us mortals.
I hear you, man. And we're actually doubling down on that at AMT. We've got in my purview the research department, which is your economists, statisticians, data scientists, but also the technology, the namesake of the association, which is what I referred to earlier. We're building out more and more opportunities for and offerings for small biz startups, for the investment side of the equation to come in and get the market intel, whether you're doing SWOT analysis, go-to-market strategies, economic indicators, nationally, internationally. We really want these businesses to do well. 2023 is our first real push into being more intentional about doing that for businesses.
We should talk more about that because manufacturing is really the behind the scenes of every single industry. And every industry sits on top of it, even tech. So we'll talk about software, but software sits on something. And so when we build these systems, it always comes down to understanding the manufacturing landscape. But because it's behind the scenes of everything, it's also an infinite problem set. I run a manufacturing company. Literally
Yeah.
anything that you do, you're like, this could be way better. I've been doing it for 20 plus years and it's so much better
Yeah.
than it was, but it could be so much better. And so the opportunity for startups to get involved is unlimited. It's an unlimited value space and it's a high value space. I want to talk a little bit about MT Connect because from my perspective, I'm really interested in the defense industrial base or security and digital twin initiatives that we're seeing because I'm a US manufacturer. The people that I work with, everything has to be made in the US, but there's a bigger and bigger push to go full digital, definitely paperless, but also to know the chain of custody of a product as it's being made and have deep assurance into it. If I was a high school student, and I wanted to get into manufacturing, could you explain MT Connect at that level? And then can you explain it
Yeah.
on the a technologist level after that?
Basically, think about all of your gadgets and devices that you have, laptop, tablets, phones, anything else that you might want to do. And you want to share your information across all of that stuff. Or I want to have one place to go to see where all of my iTunes accounts are being utilized or Netflix is being utilized. So each of those devices natively have their own language. They're going to talk it in a certain dimension, in a certain structure, and by definitions could easily have the same function but be defined and called different things. So to get to that one dashboard, if you will, or that central repository where everyone understands everything about a thing, that's MT Connect. It's the semantic dictionary is the term, but it's a translator. ON means on, OFF means off. So no matter what you call it in German, Japanese, Chinese, or Mandarin, or English, ON means on, and we all agree, and you can move forward. Well, on the very pedestrian example, it seems like a no-brainer, but what happens when you start talking about multi-axis or different end effectors, not for just a robot, but maybe it's for different cutters that happen to be on a robot, and you start getting interesting elements, the data model gets complex. So on the technical level, what we're really trying to do is we're still one step below ontology. So we're not necessarily defining the relationships and the information about those relationships, but we are saying if you're going to use this word, it's a hierarchical structure, parent to child. Component means this, it has a title and it has a definition, and we're always going to use those things across the spectrum. And the reason I say it that way is because that's just one element, the data coming off of machine. But that machine data still needs to interact with other machine data that's not necessarily discrete manufacturing, like HVACs. We also need to know about productivity at the shop level, the factory level. That has a lot of data that has nothing to do with manufacturing necessarily. And so it could be your ERP system as you start to go out. How in the world do you get all of that from an operations management perspective to say whether I'm green, yellow, red for my entire factory? It can't just be MT Connect. In fact, there's about a dozen, much like the internet protocol. If you think about how in the world I push one button on Amazon and a package shows up the next day, it's not one standard that does that. In fact, that's hundreds of standards that do that. So we're behind the scenes trying to harmonize, taking the MT Connect information model, harmonize the data that come off equipment with other stuff. Maybe it's a conveyor for material handling. Maybe it's the HVAC because you're doing productivity at the factory level. And we have to work as standards development organizations. We have to work with all these other SDOs. So there might be a room to solve one problem, might have 7 or 8 SDO representatives in there. And each of those representatives might have 3 or 4 people that are domain experts. Some are information modelers, right? And you continue to go on. And it looks much more like a whiteboard at Twitter or Facebook or Google 30 years ago. What does this look like to go up? That's interesting just for me to think about where manufacturing is going today. It looks much more like a network topology problem than it does necessarily collecting a chip and recycling problem. But yet, that data is so important, as you just said, because the defense are starting to ask. NASA already asks. Thankfully, the technology has incrementally kept up with the pace of NASA, meaning they don't send up rockets every day. They certainly don't send up tens of thousands of them. But there's been traceability requirements for things like NASA since they started doing any kind of space exploration. And we're starting to see similar things at the product level and in defense and energy to infrastructure. You talked about trusted AI. There's trusted grid infrastructure, hard stuff that is still being considered as, well, how do we know this came from there? And it wasn't even last summer we heard about some pauses some major programs for defense because it didn't come from where they thought it came from.
Yeah, information assurance is unbelievably important. And the next gen solution is to build a digital twin that involves the entire custody chain of I've received this material. This is the person, this is the machine, this is it being in process. And you're starting to see bubbling up discussions around I want in real time as Lockheed Martin to be able to go down my supplier chain and see that this is when that part is actually being made and to know that it's being made on the same machine with the same cut as last time. And to be able to do deep cross domain supply chain assurance, you have to have a common model for information. It's going beyond digital twin because digital twin would be I have nice renderings in most people's opinions. I have nice renderings of my machines and I could flip things around at 3D and I could get information from pockets. Where I see CMMC going and the other cybersecurity requirements like 800, 171 and what's coming down the pike after that on important contracts. I want to see, I just outsourced it to this company. Did they actually make it? And if they did make it, did they make it like last time? Because if it's flight qualified, that's very important to me. And if they did, I want to be able to not just see, is this hole the right size, but in real time, I want to see, are the conditions on my cuts similar in a way that was last time on the qualified part? And
Mhm.
for people that are listening, okay, they're going really deep into manufacturing, but understand that this kind of information gathering at mass has direct applications to any kind of sensor network. Because really what Tim's talking about is turning infrastructure into mass sensors and then pulling and aggregating that data across a heterogeneous network. So multiple different organizations from multiple different vendors of products and then pulling it, dashboarding it to say, is green light.
What's crazy too, Callie, is we've had trying to wrap our hands around this, as you can tell, is tough. And as I've talked bits and pieces of this to professors and industry practitioners, and even just visionists, they'll cast a 20-year vision and use some interesting words. Everything about what we're talking about is looking more and more every day like a systems engineering problem. And part of it's deterministic, most of it's probabilistic. And what kind of a mindset and what kind of a paradigm have we been applying to that problem that have just been misaligned? People just get frustrated. And it looks like from the layman's that, oh, all this money or all these programs or this new institute or all this keeps going. And we still don't have an answer. Well, we have a little bit more of the answer. But what we're starting to realize is this is a very complicated situation. And I hope people can appreciate the word complicated versus complex. Not only are there many elements, those elements don't do what we think they might do anytime, but complications like a watch, think of mechanical complication. A complicated scenario is actually many, many elements, but we do understand a bit about one of the elements. Now, we may not be good to predict the fourth, fifth, and sixth, but it's not because we don't know what each of the fourth, fifth, and sixth element might do. I think the frustration is going to help accelerate some things. I think there's a lot in the AI world to help us understand probabilistic expectation and where we care about it too. It's just like manufacturing. Do you really want one thou tolerance on your part? Do you know how much that's going to cost and what does it really matter? I think we're going to have a lot of those kind of conversations.
But on a data engineering, systems engineering level, do you really need this level of fidelity about your manufacturing process or productivity? But yeah, I see MT Connect filtering over into the information assurance community versus the productivity community. So breaking out of manufacturing because I want to see the runtime on a part or the condition of a machine, which is valuable in and of itself, but it's not the highest order value. It's not the highest value problem. I've always envisioned or fantasized is probably a better word for this, that there was a lab to go to, at least locally, where we could see some machines and see MT Connect, put it on there and see digital twin technology, take look at that multi-vendor solution, just go there as a technologist or as a manufacturer and get hands-on. Because I understand in principle how it works. It's my manufacturing roots. I actually want to touch it. I want to cut a part on it. I want to design something, shoot it over there and see it go from our paper sketch to engineering it to making it, putting it together. Is there further plans for AMT to work with some of the other organizations that in that space to be able to hop in? Because
Mm.
I know I work with George Mason University, and by extension, they're part of the U.S. manufacturing consortium that has a lot of the solutions out there. I know for a fact that GMU's interested in the cybersecurity portion of this. They don't have a lab to go to, because if they did,
Oh, well, boy, do we have a sale for you today then? We've done a little bit of a two-front approach to this. One has been giving universities like a George Mason. In fact, I'm glad you dropped the dime on them because I want to go talk to them about a couple things. The folks who were early have stayed connected, if you will, with MT Connect. So Georgia Tech has some interesting stuff. And I'll just give you examples. So there's probably half a dozen to a dozen of universities that have MT Connect installed, you know about it on their machines. They use that data and it's part of their curriculum. But that's probably a tenth of the people who, because they're smart, they go look online, they find out there's a GitHub repository of MT Connect. We have an agent, we have an adapter. I'm using a bunch of vernacular, but they go figure that out on themselves and they're using MT Connect data and we don't even know about it. But for the intentional ones, we do want to see more of the universities that have equipment use MT Connect. So we're trying to push that out. It's kind of an ad hoc go. NIST up at Gaithersburg in their engineering lab also have a smart manufacturing test bed. And one of the things I'm doing this year is actually working as a guest researcher at NIST on digital twin of all things. And what they're wanting is an industrial perspective. So I'm looking at places like NIST. I'm looking at places like Oak Ridge National Lab. And I know I'm saying words that people are going, I don't go to Tennessee. This is a national lab. I'm just looking for my local fill in the blank. We'll get there. You hit the nail on the head. People who don't deal in information modeling or data, the intangible nature of this stuff we're talking about in data is just the value's lacking until you at least get a dashboard. And to your point earlier, the dashboard will only get you so far. It's a good step, necessary but not sufficient. We've been working in our tech centers around the world. So AMT has a tech center in Chennai, India, and Shanghai, China. We have a tech center in Monterrey, Mexico, office coverage in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and out of the EU. In the tech centers, we have put on demonstrations of the thing you just described because people could not quite understand why the data is useful. Once they see the dashboard, just like your car, like, oh my goodness, okay, got it. So we have an obligation to figure that out a little better at the institute level. What places and what's the curriculum? Now we do have, as part of a learning management system, about 8 modules for MT Connect that just talks you through the 101. What do the letters even stand for, all the way to how do I get started with MT Connect? I would encourage folks to go to mtconnect.org. And a lot of the links to the things I'm talking about are right there, including some white papers of what it means and what it means for my business, more importantly. But we definitely need to do a little bit better job. Thankfully, it's not a green grass effort. It's brown and dirt. We got some stuff going in the universities and labs, but yeah, we're trying to actually improve that up at NIST, at the engineering lab. They're commissioning a digital twin lab as we speak. And we're trying to figure out, well, what equipment and how are you going to demonstrate it? What does that even look like? We're there, but we're incrementally there.
very interested to see when we get a little bit further down this securing the supply chain conversation, because a lot of, say, NIST 800, 171, pushing up requirements to small manufacturers, and we're going to meet their cybersecurity requirements. But to be fair, we have a pretty good foothold in technology. Other small shops, let's say machine shops, they're at a loss for how this works, and the market is going to change. There's problems with CNC machines in general, the way that they're built for cybersecurity. And I see downstream a confluence of, say, organizations like what they're doing at Mason with their cybersecurity program in conjunction with manufacturing, and then adding MT Connect as an element to ensure that nobody's watching Netflix on their Haas machine control, because you could just walk up to it and break it like that. And unless it's properly segmented and firewall, it's very difficult. You can't install virus protection. You can't install point management system. You can't install Kaseya on it or Microsoft Defender for endpoint. You can't actually secure it like you would a computer, but it is a computer. It's actually several computers, and they're really easy to hack. I see this future confluence, or maybe it's the future of now confluence of cybersecurity for manufacturing and MT Connect. You can pull that data and say, I understand the hand of that data. This is what that machine should be doing for people that are listening, if they're security nerds, they know what I'm talking about. But you could determine in World War II where an encrypted message was coming from because they would memorize the hand or the sequence and cadence of the person actually hitting the keys. A lot of information assurance is done like that is because I understand that a signal or a piece of data, it looks a certain way regardless. But then when it is in an out of order condition, similar to say you go load that's coming off of a machine, if the tool is broken or it's buried in the part, it's going to use up more or less power because it's in an out of normal condition. And similarly, information is like that as well. Right now, the most wild thing in the world to me is that everything that is the most secure, anything in the world is being made on the least secure devices that are possible. And there's very little research being done on how to segregate those machine controls and have any kind of real-time logging or assurance that they're not spying on your part.
Yeah, we've seen an influx of new startup companies. Actually, the latest one coming in from Israel is an industrial security system, but it's really meant for insider activity and then not always nefarious, some two left thumbs kind of stuff. And they're realizing, I think, I don't know the percentages, I've heard 70, 80, whatever it is, of all those incidences have been insider threats. It's crazy. When I look at that, and then I look at we were walking IMTS 2022 last year in September, and I was actually taking this company around because they wanted to understand, hey, is the market ready for an industrial security system, hardware on their controller? And I said, let's go talk to some folks. And I won't say any names to keep everybody innocent, but half the people we talked to, granted, the half we talked to that gave me this answer were not necessarily technical. So maybe they were just giving me a quick answer. But their answer to security was that they had Windows 10, man. I'm good. And I was like, I don't think you heard the question.
Yeah. To show you what you could do with just plugging a USB into that control and breaking a $500,000 piece of equipment or turning it into a spy device within under 30 seconds. It blows people's mind. I see that coming right now. Yeah, they are just trying to get people to have updated computers. So to be honest, that person's response is perfectly valid because if you go into most small machine shops, they're probably going to have a 15-year-old computer that has
Yeah.
any kind of protection on it. They've got loose USBs everywhere and they have old equipment that's not properly networked. It's the nature of investing in capital equipment. You don't want to just replace it because you install new software on it. This is going to be a very interesting time, I think, in the next 5 years, because I'm positive we've talked about this in the past. My idea of hacking manufacturing equipment, I pulled up a pitch for this 5 years ago. I think just,
White hat NSA. We're talking about white hat here.
no, I would say red team, right? You have a setup, you set it up as if you were, say, Lockheed or GD or Northrop Grumman, say, this is how we do our engineering lab here. Say, great, bring in red team, see what we could do. Let's do some simple pen testing. Let's do XYZ, see what we can do, and then get those best results and then bring it back. This is important because people bring those machines all the way out to the battlefield, building out connexes with printers and small CNC equipment to be able to real time replace broken piece of equipment, a bracket. A bracket could cause a multi-million-dollar failure in the field. If you think that this is a problem for just at home or that I'm being odd, a lot of these same equipment is used in the field as an emergency stopgap. And if that was exposed, there's lots of information that's available. I don't know if there's second, third order consequences to that kind of risk.
Yeah. And we just had, again, I'll leave the names out, it's public though, but a printer company, OEM, just got a pretty high fine from the US government because what effectively was ITAR information went into China for production to produce things for defense. And it had nothing to do with the technology. It was all about process and data, who has access to it, who does not. And we, interestingly enough, at AMT, will sit in a room in commerce at the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS. That's the commerce agent and one of the heads sitting at the table for export controls. And you'll hear this language, you hear these things, and generally we're trying to go, listen, let's not get too crazy on export controls because we're going to lose that battle financially, and we won't have return on those sales for investment for further R&D and all this other good stuff that economists all know about. But the same department will go to the point I just said and go, well, listen, I can't have certain part files and data about a run being conveyed over lines of communication, and certainly not to a machine that's open to an operator that's in a country that we don't want them seeing
Sure.
this stuff. And same department, two diametrically opposed missions, and they're both right. It's going to be interesting to see how we innovate as a nation with the underlying thread of the digital nature and the importance of data. We so much want to advance that because it makes a lot of sense technologically and business related, but it does come with different risks that we have not necessarily totally figured out.
A good example of this is if I'm working off of paper drawings, it's easy to walk out with that piece of paper and for it to get lost. So it's unsecured. But in essence, it's only a single piece of paper, and distributing it has some barriers to entry that are more difficult. Like I would have to digitize it and then send it out. I would have to actually physically walk it out of the building, which I may or may not be able to do. Whereas if it's digital native, all that work's done for me. I can, yeah, I could
Yeah,
accidentally send
you're
it
right.
very easily.
You know, and even going back to the manufacturing technology itself, this has been a few years now, but Virginia Tech guys, and I think, Professor Chris Williams runs their Dreams Lab with the additive and all the stuff, demonstrate with an additive machine how he could change the code, basically turn laser power off for a little bit. Now you got a void of unsintered powder or unmelted materials, and that caused a failure before you would have predicted the failure to occur. And because it was embedded inside, all the CMM in the world wouldn't catch it. And most people don't have a CT, and they certainly haven't necessarily made a benchmark profile of the CT to even compare against to know that there was a void that was unintentional. It's a full-fledged holistic problem. I do think, and I hope that it will execute, that when we see dollars going into AI, machine learning, when we see things like the integrated network of systems, like all these things that sound good at the surface level, the DoD is putting hundreds of millions of dollars in each year, by the way. I hope people think about this when they litmus test that project and they go, okay, what does this really mean if I go press the green button on Monday morning and a part comes out? Like, where have I improved my day? Because oftentimes we get a little lost up front. It's just about the tech advancement. We don't really think about what this really means to the 80% of businesses that are 50 people or less in our manufacturing space doing something.
It's very difficult for small businesses to implement this unless they're very tech focused. But
Yeah.
for people that are listening, this is important to understand because if you have one of these skill sets in AI, in information assurance or cybersecurity, there is an enormous amount of funding once you transport that knowledge into manufacturing or into industry. One, because there's big businesses and you're solving billion-dollar problems, but two, because let's say DIU right now, they have an open solicitation for advanced manufacturing for composites. And you can go to NSF, you can go to the different DoD programs like AFWorks, and you'll continually see year after year or quarter after quarter in the case of the SBIRs, that there is an open
Mhm.
request to use your knowledge as a expert in one space specifically for manufacturing. And so those funding opportunities are minimum like 150, 175, but in many cases, a million, $2 million. And so if you do have an idea and you're looking to connect that and commercialize it in a completely new space, there is an intense amount of funding through grants for those types of programs. And then through DIU, potentially through actual contracts. There's a couple of different contract vehicles that are quick and lightweight. So you as a startup or an entrepreneur can actually afford to manage them and get them before you turn gray. Otherwise, it takes about 30 months to get something going, whereas they can do that, issue it pretty quickly. How do you see the startup community and entrepreneurs? A lot of people don't identify as startups. They just identify themselves as tech entrepreneurs. How do you see that changing manufacturing, which is traditionally, it's the big business of big businesses?
The easiest route in is through the software side of the house, and I understand that. Robotics has helped. There's been a ton in the automation space, particularly in robotics, of the new business. We won't call it a startup business, but these new business models coming in with new technologies. It's interesting. We're going into 2023 now. We had a softening in the investments last year, towards the end of last year, but we didn't see a dry up. So we didn't see term sheets being burned and torn up. They just saw them being recalled and held, if you will. We're headquartered in McLean, Virginia. It's right outside of DC, the other side of the river. But we have a tech lab, which is different than a tech center. We have a tech lab in San Francisco, and we just had a huge merger and acquisition of the Silicon Valley Robotics group there in Andrew Kay. So she's been leading that for many years. And she has been seeing where it used to be a lot of just consumer based robotic applications and companies that are funding that and getting it out into the market. A lot of people are asking industrial questions. And one of the more interesting things, Ryan Kelly for us is our GM of our San Fran Tech Lab. Ryan comes out of the make time zometry worlds, kind of understands the data and the integration and all the stuff that makes to make a thing. He's looking at this and we're talking about there's things that they're doing for the consumer. They had no idea how good of a benefit it is to the industrial. If there's any trends in that startup world, they are folks who are in that mechatronic, robotic kind of space primarily. There's a handful of the advanced materials and even on the metrology side, especially looking at non-contact and vision and different things in optics. But a lot of these folks are just learning about manufacturing, even though they thought they knew about it. So when we sit in on some of these research days I was telling you about earlier, especially if it's for a due diligence kind of an exercise, when we start laying the landscape of the billions to trillions of GDP and market addressable and serviceable markets that have to deal with manufacturing, first off, most people's eyes get bigger than they thought it were. So I have no idea. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's a big business. But second thing is they usually don't know the whole rest of their supply chain ecosystem story. And they think, man, I got to go all this alone. There's hardly any technologies in the manufacturing space that I think work alone. Machine tools has to have a control. There's just all these things that people don't really know until they dig a little deeper. And that's part of AMT's job to really better inform, not just about your ecosystem in the market, but man, who's that next partner you didn't know about that you need? Because why spend a year and $100,000 if you could spend 1 half-hour call and 20,000 and still make twice as much as you wanted on your ROI. By the way, that's a major theme we are seeing is partnerships. Partnerships through the public-private area, not just Manufacturing USA institutes, but seeing partnerships by tech companies. So these accelerators, these incubators, these folks know people and they're starting to see that in our hard tech world, if you will, the manufacturing space, that's the biggest problem is who do I need to know that I don't? And because I'm just one piece of a much, much larger pie. And we're not just an app on a phone. So it's exciting when you look at it that way.
I've been participating or running hard tech accelerators for the past 5, 6 years, doing clean tech right now. And clean tech is exactly the same way. People are struggling because there's a funding chasm. And then when I show them the way that I've grown my business, the way that I've grown my client's business, it's always partnerships. I really like B2B, B2G business. And to think who already is working with your customer, who already is just doing a fantastic job in that ecosystem. They're not a competitor, they're a partner. They're a sales channel partner, they're a tech partner, they're a mentor. And to go out there, we've cut that time to market down to months instead of years, where we're just bringing technology and saying, okay, our thing is on this other thing, and we're going to work with this person and package it up as a solution. That's been a game changer. I think Silicon Valley is catching up to that, but really for us in manufacturing, to me, it's nothing more than a supply chain. I'm building rugged computers. I'm not going to build every chip and every board and every connector, but everything that I integrate with from the software all the way down is a potential partnership and how we get opportunities. And so to build a little consortium of who we're working with, it makes perfect sense. But then I move over into that kind of investment space, the temptation to go dark, be a stealth startup. You'll be stealth. No one will ever know you exist.
That's true. The best ninja ever.
You're the best ninja ever. No one knew you were born. Yeah.
Oh, man.
But that's really interesting. I know manufacturing has gotten better and better about building tech coalitions and tech centers. And we have moved over to Akuma for our higher end machines. And they've done a good job of then going out and saying, okay, we're going to have a tech center and we're going to show people an actual ecosystem of functional interrelated products versus, hey, here's a machine. You want it? It's $700,000. You want it or not?
Have you been down to their Charlotte plant?
We're sending somebody in a couple weeks to their open house. Should get some feedback because we're in the market for a new 5 axis. We're moving up in the world. But I know it's very exciting. I wish I could go to more things like that. It's just really difficult with all of the things that I do to myself that I put
I
on my
mean, life
plate.
is in front of you? I don't get it. We had a chance to go and interview Jim King and, to IMTS, and that was it had been in fact, no, that was the first time I had a chance to walk their plant. They're actually building out new stuff there, so we were in different little spots than we normally would have been because they're upgrading, modernizing some build space too, so yeah, it's a great place, man. Just down there, we'll enjoy it.
I'm excited to get the feedback. I've been to every one of our other suppliers' factories, and or at least their customer friendly factories to see like Amada and Haas and LVD and some of the other. It's unbelievable to see things at that scale get put together. Really inspiring. I really appreciate your time coming on the show. I know you're busy. You're doing all kinds of things. Before I let you go, is there something that you're just absolutely have to share, that this is the gold nugget of this conversation that Tim's passionate about and wants everyone to know?
I think because data has such a play to advance the state of our manufacturing space, and because the interoperability of that is gonna be so important for cybersecurity and for the provenance of knowing about the data. mtconnect.org and our SysML approach to doing this is about the only way we can keep up with that demand. If you are an end user or a producer of the manufacturing technology, controls, software, equipment, anything, and you've got use cases, I wish data could do this for me and harmonize with that, go to mtconnect.org, join our standards committee. It's free. The standard, when we publish it, is free. If you don't speak up about where your pain points are, other people will. And these use cases are what drive the standards world. And we're trying to do things to make that standard development much quicker, much more engaging, and keeping up with the demand from a technological standpoint as best we can. So that's just it, man. I appreciate it, Callie.
That's an unbelievably simple pitch for people that are listening that are in cybersecurity or they're in information technology that are looking for a way to break out through the noise and do something really special to impact the world, make money, build a real business. Manufacturing is the infinite sets of problems and opportunity. So I really would like people to Tim saying, dial your sights in on manufacturing and MT Connect and understand the information that we're dealing with is worth millions or billions of dollars. And what you're doing to secure people's YouTube watching on a network, or what you're doing to fight for space in the cloud architecture business, if you took that same skill set and moved it over to manufacturing, you would be an unbelievable outlier and unbelievably successful proportional to the level of effort they're putting in every day into a competitive market. Yeah, I was super excited to have you on the show. I think people struggle really, they're very smart. They're working really hard on the wrong opportunity. And the right opportunity is just, it's right there in McLean. Right? It's right there
I
in
love it.
mtconnect.org. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.